I'm Brian with Amongst the Giants, and you're listening to the Classic Christian Rock Podcast with Wildman and Steve.
Hello, everybody. We want to welcome you once again to the Classic Christian Rock Podcast. Co-host Steve Perkins is with me once again, Latin teacher, metal rock enthusiast, and just an all-around great guy. How are you doing today, Steve?
Wildman, I got to say, I appreciate that, by the way. And the feeling is mutual. You're a great guy as well. That you asked how I'm doing, and you mentioned that I'm a Latin teacher. That field of Latin, the language and history and all that is called classics or classical studies. And I guess I'm in sort of a classic mood and kind of would like to talk to a classic Christian musician. Do you know anybody?
I don't know. I just may. It's amazing how I didn't even think about that when we chose the name for this podcast, the Classic Christian Rock Podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, what Steve is getting at here is we do have a classic, I would say classic musician, classic Christian rock artist, classic evangelist with us, Mr. Mylon Lefevre. Mylon, welcome to the program. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, brother, I am so blessed and thankful to be here with you guys. What an honor.
Yes, we are excited to have you with us as well. Mylon, as our show focuses on people that have made an impact on our lives, I've never said this before, Steve, but this one of the things that we do with this is all volunteer. Steve and I just do this because we like it. And I actually see a bit personal benefit. Maybe we're a little bit selfish, but Steve, this gives us the opportunity to talk to musicians that we love. You out there who are listening, you just get to listen in. We just wanted an excuse to actually talk to people, to talk to the artists we love so much. So,
I was actually hoping you would never be honest about that because it's a chance for a couple of music geeks to talk to their guys that they've listened to for years, man.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the ultimate backstage pass.
Yeah, but as listeners out there, you're more than welcome to continue to listen in. Absolutely. So, Mylon, to begin with, this is a standard question that you've probably answered before, and all artists get, but it's always a good thing to go back in time. How did you get started in music in the first place? I mean, one of the things that we know about your history is that you had some incredible feats early on, where you were able to meet some of what we would call the big names and work with the big names early on. Can you talk about how that came about at such a young age?
Well, my parents were musicians, and, I was the youngest at that time. I mean, later on I had a younger sister, but when I was the youngest of four kids when I came along, and parents who had no choice but to take their kids on the road with them. Every weekend we were on the road, and a lot of times during the week. And we'd be back home, we'd go out and do a gig, and the gig would be over at 8 and 9 o'clock. It'd start like at 7 o'clock, and 9 o'clock it'd be over. And they'd drive back to Georgia, South Carolina. We lived in Atlanta, Alabama, Tennessee, within 100 miles, they'd go to all the little, there wasn't that much. I'm 75 years old, guys. You got to remember this back, I was born in 1944. So in the 50s, there was no TV yet. There was no, it was just coming along. There was one theater in most towns. Once you saw the movie, you had to wait a few weeks before another one came along. There wasn't a lot of competition for things to do. And the bottom line is my parents were gospel singers, and they drove around and sung in these places, so all of their friends were musicians. So I grew up thinking everybody's a musician. When my parents' friends came over, they jammed. That's what pickers do. They brought their axes, and they came in, and they got around the keyboard, or somebody pulled out a guitar, and And my dad and my uncle, they were from the hills of Tennessee, so some of their axes were like banjos and mandolins and fiddles. You know, my Uncle Alf played a fiddle. Y'all know the difference in a violin and a fiddle?
What's that?
Yeah, we're waiting.
There is no difference. It's just whoever plays it decides what it is. When my uncle played it, it was a fiddle. But, you know, if Rachmaninoff played it, it was a violin. So the bottom line is it was a style of music, and when everybody came over and jammed with my parents, I was just, 4 or 5 years old, and I'm staring at all that thinking, dude, I got to get me an axe. I mean, my dad got this little ukulele, with plastic strings, but it was the only thing that was small enough to where I didn't have much strength in my hands and fingers at 5 or 6, but I started learning chords on that ukulele, and I could join in on the jam. They'd run me out of the room, but I started off that way. And as I got older and bigger, then I could fret different instruments. So I just learned to pick the bottom line is, to answer your question, I thought everybody's parents went to gigs and set up, and I thought until I got in school, I just thought everybody picked, and everybody, so it was a dream from childhood. I got to get good enough to set in with my heroes, which is my parents and my older brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles. It was a very musical gang that my parents hung out with.
You made a comment there about a time when there wasn't as much, just entertainment maybe of any kind. Kind of, you think about today, right? You can watch a movie, a full-length motion picture on your phone, right? While sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store. So, from where we are now, 2020, to then, that's quite a difference in terms of what's accessible for entertainment and so forth. How do you think that the accessibility of entertainment has changed the entertainment field itself? And whether you talk about entertainment in general or specifically with gospel music and so forth, but how has that changed for good or for bad to have it more accessible 24/7?
Well, I don't know how I did it for everybody else. I personally, and this is a horrible thing to admit, but I might as well go ahead and be honest and confess right up front. But I think I've got 50 albums. Of course, we call them CDs. What do they call them nowadays? They're just downloads now. But at one time they were called albums, and I did my first one when I was 12. And by 17, Elvis cut one of my tunes. At 19, I was already writing all my songs, producing my own records, and playing all the instruments in some instances on my first rock stuff, And so the bottom line is I spent so many years, and if you sell enough records, they make best ofs. They put together packages about every 5 years. If you're selling enough where they can make money off of you, that's the cheapest thing a record company can do is take 10 or 12 of your songs and slap them on some. All they pay for is the artwork, and they master it. They got hardly anything in it. And best ofs, the Eagles' best ofs sold 31 million or something. They made more money on that than any other record. So the bottom line is I got either 49 or 50. I actually lost count, but that's a bunch of hours in the studio. You have to write about 50 or 60 songs to get 10 or 12 that you think are good enough to where they actually, when you get in the studio, sometimes you got a great song on stage. It really rocks. It feels good. Everybody loves it. It's an anthem for the festivals in the summertime. And yet you put it in the studio and you try to get it to transfer to tape, and it just doesn't work, and you don't know why. And you can hire the best engineers, and you can hire the best studios in the world, and triple scale union players and the best producers in the world, and if anybody could make it work every time, they'd be King Kong. They'd make so much money you couldn't spend it all. But you can't force it. It is a gift from God, and every once in a while you're just standing out in the rain, you get struck by lightning, and it's a blessing, and everybody likes what you did, which has always been the reason I did that. The reason I made music. Now, I'm not talking about just Christian music, but when I was a kid, the reason I made music was I was a writer first. I was not trying to be a hero or a star in a band traveling around the world. That was not my goal. My goal, and the most exciting thing that ever happened to me before I met Jesus and surrendered my life and received him as Lord and Master, the most exciting thing that ever happened to me was God, the Creator, allowed me to hear a song before anybody else on the earth. He let me be the first one to hear one of his creations. And then I got to get my buddies and go in the studio and show everybody what I heard. And sometimes a million or 2 or 3 people liked it enough to buy one of them. And when I would go out and do the festivals, they knew what was coming because they'd heard it on the radio. So we'd be rocking, and all of a sudden we'd come to the breakdowns. In a live, you might do a song in the studio, might last 4 minutes. But if it's one that everybody likes, then you change the dynamics live. You maybe slow it down and jam on it a little bit, and then you stretch it out, and you might, there's all kind of things you can do with it, and it changes every night when you jam. But they know what's coming. The people know what's coming. If they've been fans of yours, they've been to one of your concerts before, they know if there's a breakdown coming. The breakdown is when the band stops playing, everybody but the drummer maybe, and the people start singing the chorus, the hook line, that the song is about, and the audience becomes the band. I used to love it. Festivals like Creation, there'd be 40,000 people on the side of that hill in Pennsylvania. And when they would take over, the band became the audience. On stage, we became the audience, and the audience became the band. And yet they were singing My Dream to me. And I would just stand there and cry, man, because that was the coolest, ultimate blessing to me, is that everybody wants to be accepted, and when they like your song, at least for those 5 minutes, you're accepted, and you share something that's beyond. It has nothing to do with what denomination you're in, and or what color your hair is, or whether you're tall or skinny, or black or white, or male or female. You just go AWOL in God. I loved that, man. I was, that inspired me to continue to write songs. So I was a writer first, and later on, when the record company said, this is good, we want to invest in it, but you got to tour. Then I put together my buddies and hit the road. But I toured with my family when I was a kid, teenager. I started touring. Me and Ronnie Millsap, we had a 4-piece band. And I was 15, and believe it or not, I was his drummer. That's where I started. And
okay, I'm sorry, I got cut out. You were with Ronnie Millsap.
Yeah, in the summer. I mean, we went to school during the year, but in the summertime, Ronnie had just gotten going. We had a little band. We played anything from grocery store. We played Texaco openings, man. We'd do anything. We played a swimming pool. Anybody that would pay us anything. At 15, 16, 17 years old, believe me, we weren't the greatest band, but we loved making music, and we did our little R&B stuff. And then I would sing on the weekends with my family. And then at 25, I got a record deal with Atlantic Records, and my parents had fired me for having sideburns, so the whole Christian thing had gotten really hard for me. The more that I pushed the envelope, there was no such thing in those days. Nobody had coined the phrase contemporary Christian music yet. So it was like Jesus rock was what they were calling it in California, and people like Larry Norman, who was really a folk singer. It wasn't really rock, but when he went in the studio, he hired some rock musicians, some really good musicians, and made some rock stuff, and it was really good. Why should the devil have all the good music was a great song and a great question, and